Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the August 2022. It's hard to believe it's August already. Webinar from the Ohio Workforce Coalition. As you are joining, I'm going to go through just some housekeeping, some basics, and tell you a little bit about our guests today. So my name is Rebecca Kushner. I'm director of the Ohio Workforce Coalition. I have been a longtime member, and I'm excited to bring you today's session. Each month, the coalition offers webinars on a range of topics. I encourage you to check out our website, which is up on the screen, where you can view or link to previous webinars and the recordings and materials, but you can also learn more about our current policy priorities. The Ohio Workforce Coalition is 15 years old this year, and we have set a fundraising goal of $15,000 for our policy work. You can also click on the link in the chat to contribute to that effort, and every contribution really does help. Since 2007, the Ohio Workforce Coalition has been bringing together leaders from education and training institutions, economic and workforce development organizations, business and industry, labor, human services, and so on, to work together to grow prosperity across Ohio by advancing policies and practices that support workers, employers, and build transparency and equity into our workforce systems. We have, as I mentioned, monthly webinars on the fourth Thursday of the month, and they are recorded and available on the website. You can also see that we've got our Twitter up there. Please feel free to tweet if you are so inclined, or follow us and engage with us on Twitter. It's the first place that you will go to find information. It's the first place we push stuff out to. I am particularly excited about today's session because it is a really interesting time to be in the workforce development field. And one of the reasons it's interesting is that there are emerging concepts, emerging ideas, different ways of working, different ways of thinking, different priorities coming up on a regular basis. And the notion of skills-based hiring and competency-based education is one of those ideas, one of those innovations. And Opportunity at Work has been for years really a leader in this space and has worked really hard to help the rest of us understand the importance of looking beyond traditional educational credentials or other proxies as we're looking to hire talent. So our guests today are from Opportunity at Work. Bridgette Gray I have been enjoying talking to Bridgette regularly over the last few months. She is a strategist, operator, organization builder, and I have a sense is really good at partnerships and collaboration towards outcomes. She joined Opportunity at Work after 7.5 years at Perscolis, and actually knows some of our Columbus friends from the Perscolis site in Columbus. She is the Chief Impact Officer, responsible for a wide range of things. And I'm not going to read her full bio, but we will circulate it with the materials. Bridgette is joined by Jennifer Shamy. And Jen has, as Senior Director of Market Expansion, has been working closely to spread the idea of and the work of Opportunity at Work across the country, particularly relative to the STARS initiative. Jen also did some time at Perscolis and served as Vice President of Development and really worked at looking at new markets and how to scale initiatives. I am very curious. It says here that Jen has massive dogs at home, and I have a Great Dane sleeping next to me. So can't wait to hear what kind of massive dogs she has. But oh, French Mastiffs, very cool. I grew up with English Mastiffs. So anyway, lots of experience at the table, lots of really important insights on both the notion of skills-based approaches, but also what's it mean to take them to market. And I know they've put together some special, special data for Ohio that they're going to share, and I'm really looking forward to it. We are going to hold questions till the end. So as usual, put your questions in the chat. We will let folks continue to join. The chat is open, and feel free to respond to questions, add on, comment, and so on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bridgette and Jen.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. I love the way that you talked about Jen also spent some time at First Scholars. But we are really excited to be here today. So thank you to Rebecca. Thank you to Carter for really helping us to get grounded. We are going to be really respectful and try to run through these slides pretty quickly, but also making sure we give you enough detail because we're really curious about your questions and your engagement. And so who is Opportunity at Work? You can move to the next slide, Carter. And so who we are is we are a national nonprofit. We are a social enterprise. Our entire existence is about rewiring the U.S. labor market to be able to create other opportunities to for STARS. We'll talk a little bit about who STARS are, but STARS are workers who are skilled through an alternative route. We want to make sure that STARS have access to well-paying careers. We also want to make sure that we're boosting the economy and generating $20 million in annual earnings so that once STARS move into roles where they're earning more dollars, those dollars are then translated back into earnings and then into a local community. Next slide. So we talk about skills-based hiring all the time. And one of the things that we've been tracking at Opportunity at Work is this momentum for skills-based hiring. We've seen that it has grown over the last 2 years, going into almost 3 years since we've really been pushing this. And this momentum, the skills-based hiring is really creating a space where there's momentum being gained for STARS. Next slide. And so when you start to think about Opportunity at Work, we root everything we do in data. Everything we think about is the US economy, the workers in the US, and how do we find them? How do we know where they are? How do we know what their career paths look like? So we've done a series of reports. We've dug into 170 million job records, and that's how we landed in the space of realizing that there are more than 70 million workers who we call STARS that are skilled through an alternative route instead of a bachelor's degree. And half of the workforce are STARS. STARS can get their skills in multiple ways. They don't get those skills through a four-year bachelor's degree, but they do gain those skills through boot camps or apprenticeship models or workforce organizations like some of you here, maybe in their military service. But most commonly, STARS are gaining their skills through their employment, just like most of us do. And so there are 70+ million STARS in this country who are either underpaid, or who have the skills today to do higher wage jobs, but the degree is screening them out instead of screening them in. Next slide. And so as many of you already know, there's a huge mismatch in our economy between the jobs that have a degree requirement and the percentage of workers that have a bachelor's degree. We know that only 60% of the workforce has access to 26% of new jobs because the bachelor's degree is used as a proxy to screen people out. And this degree inflation has really happened since the Great Recession, and we know, frankly, before that it happened. But when the 2008 recession happened, that's when we saw this increase. I think it was a 70% increase in using the degree to determine whether or not a person has skills to actually move into higher wage roles. And so part of the things that we talk about is really how do you make sure that you're understanding who a STAR is, where they gain those skills, and how those skills are setting them up and preparing them to move into higher wage roles if the degree was not the proxy used to determine a person's skills. Next slide. In our data, one of the most shocking things we found, and it's one that I continue to go back to, is that for a star, it takes them 30 years to catch up to the wages of a bachelor's degree holder when they graduate and start their first career. So it's a 30-year gap from a salary catch up. That's huge. So if you're thinking about someone who is earning $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, when you compare that worker to someone who has a bachelor's degree, it is going to take them 30 years just to catch up from an equitable salary perspective. Next slide. And so thinking about stars, a lot of people ask the question, who are stars? And stars really represent the full diversity of the workforce. They represent the full diversity of our country. We know that there are 61% of Black workers are stars. We know that 55% of Hispanic workers, 53% of white workers are stars. We look at the 61% of veterans, the 48% of women, and 66% rural. And so when you look across the country, stars that are being screened out for employment actually represent the full representation of the US workforce. And so we really want to make sure that we help employers understand that when we talk about equity, oftentimes we're constantly talking about equity around women or equity around BIPOC communities. Realistically, when we look at stars in that 70 million, it's equity across every single demographic of people that need access to well-paying opportunities. And that's the work that we do, is to help to bring that data in front of employers, regardless of where the market is or regardless what the industry looks like. Next slide. One of the strongest pieces of evidence that stars can do many of the jobs that exist today is because a lot of these jobs are jobs that stars used to hold before degrees became the proxy for screening out. If stars had held the same proportion of gateway and destination jobs, and we talk about gateway jobs as being those that start at a minimum of about $42,000 per year, moving into maybe 60, 65, and then destination being those jobs that are higher, that gives you much more upward mobility and equity. If stars had held the same proportion of gateway and destination jobs as they did in 2000, there would be 7.5 million more workers in better jobs. But instead, we've winnowed that to the talent pool and chosen to exclude those workers through their degrees. So think about that for a second. Stars lost access to 7.5 million jobs that they had worked before. And now we're in this place where stars are grossly underpaid. It's harder for them to get back into the roles that they once held because the degree is the determining factor on whether or not they can do this job. When you think about, I'll use an example of someone as a secretary who has been doing a job for 20 years. Secretaries' roles didn't require a bachelor's degree before. And now when you think about a secretary or an executive assistant or administrative assistant, oftentimes those roles require a bachelor's degree. And that means that someone who may be doing the job for 20 years can't even get upward mobility internally because the degree proxy is still part of the determining factor on whether or not they can do the job, but yet they've already done that job. And then we know that there are these 30 key occupations that you see here on the right, which make up roughly half of the losses that stars have experienced. And these jobs are ones that we know that will pay really well, and they do have upward mobility and have the ability to move people to higher wages. And so really wanting to make sure that we can hone in on, let's get back to these particular occupations plus more and open up more pathways and by removing those degree requirements for stars. One of the other things I'll just mention too is for opportunity at work, we talk a lot about the degree requirement. The reality is we don't believe that it is a either or. We believe it's a both and. We believe that there should not be but multiple ways. There should not be one way to enter into the middle class. There should be multiple pathways into the middle class. And when we use degrees as a proxy to determine skills, then it completely locks out the bulk of workers in the US. It also is a detriment to employers because they're not able to fill those roles in a timely fashion or at all. Next slide. So how do we talk about stars and their skills? So we know that their stars have the skills for higher wage work today. An example that we often use is looking at this retail salesperson. So when you look at a retail salesperson who may be earning $18.75 an hour, who can move into a role as a sales rep earning double that amount, almost double that amount, what determines that? So one of the things we looked at were degrees of skills between one job type and another, but that is in the same job family. And so this degree, the skills distance, when you look at it, it's not that far between persuasion as a retail salesperson and persuasion between a sales rep. The degree distance is very short. But what happens is once you get to this this right column, that's when employers usually put the degree requirement in. And so we're seeing that the skills are transferable, the skills are equal, the distance between the skills are not there, but where the inequity comes in is when the positions are posted. Yeah, a retail salesperson may not need a degree, but when you get to a sales rep, the degree is then put on the position description. So again, it locks out stars from being able to gain more salary. Next slide. Some of the other things we've looked at too have been this space around how pay transitions. So when you again go to an origin job paying under $40,000 a year, those origin jobs can lead to what we call gateway jobs. So you take someone who was a retail salesperson that now moves over to a customer service rep to make $19, $20 per hour. From that customer service rep, again, you can move into what we call a destination role because those skills distances are very much aligned, but look at the salary change there. The salary is greater when you get to destination. And then when you start to look at the percent of current workers who already have a 4-year degree, you can see that they become greater when you get to destination jobs and less when you're in the origin jobs. And so we oftentimes focus on gateway, those who are already in that space where we can help them get the fastest route to a destination wage because they have the skills there. That is where we typically try to work with some of the employers to show them this so that we can help to move those stars forward. Next slide. Same way with IT. So when we think in terms of these skill pathways for IT, it's the same wage. You look at the lower wage origin jobs, how those transition over to gateway, how they then transition to destination. And so we know that the IT sector is one that specifically, you think about the federal government, oftentimes they've made really good progress. Businesses have made really good progress for some of these jobs, but the reality is they're still requiring so many in so many of these roles, they're still requiring the degree, but they're also, if the degree is removed, oftentimes there is a higher level of experience that is being required in order to move someone into the next level. And so what we really want to make sure we're helping people that we partner with understand is, let's root people in the data, let's help them see what the skills distance looks like between one pathway to another. And then let's start to help them think about how they can remove degree requirements from their position descriptions so that they can open up a broader pathway and a broader talent pipeline. And then one of the things to think about is understanding just the pathway, the path to higher wage. And so when we look at this, we look at the top row is really about the national numbers. And then in the bottom row, it's about Ohio specifically. So when we think about stars, we think about them from shining stars, rising stars, forming stars. I'll talk about shining stars. That's that 5 million people who are already in high wage roles today. The way they got to those roles was through their own mobility. So when you think about some of the slides we showed before, where we know that stars take the skills they have and they figure out what the next step is. So retail sales clerk to customer service rep to sales rep. And so there are 5 million shining stars in the US that are already in high wage roles, and there are 106,000 shining stars in the state of Ohio. When we go over to the far right and we start to think about forming stars, in the US, there are 36 million forming stars, and these are stars who don't yet have the skills for significantly high wage work based on what their current job is. And so we're thinking about opportunity youth who may not have really high work experience. We know that in Ohio, there are 1.6 million forming stars. Where we think in terms of where we can be the most supportive and helpful is in the space around rising stars. There are 30 million of them. They have the skills for significantly higher wage work, 70% or higher. That's based on the current role they have. The distance between a rising star and a shining star is not that far. And again, that's where we see the bulk of employers putting up the degree requirement. And so when we have these conversations, we're able to talk to employers about the skill level that rising stars have. And once they start to remove those degree requirements and they start to bring those stars into those roles, their performance has been outstanding. We've had employers tell us that the performance has been so outstanding that it sometimes outbeats those who already have a degree. And we know that in Ohio, there are 1.4 million rising stars across the state of Ohio. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen to dig a little bit into the Ohio numbers. Really wanted to just give you a little bit around how we ground ourselves in data, how we think about stars, how we think about skills, how we think about job families and as skills transition. But then how does this now drill down to the state of Ohio? So I'll turn it over to Jen to talk about that.
Thanks so much, Bridgette, for that awesome overview. And yes, I'm happy to cover the next few slides and really dive a bit deeper into the star landscape in Ohio. So the table on this slide really provides an overview of the proportion of stars in Ohio compared to the country as a whole. In total, as Bridgette mentioned, there are more than 3 million stars in Ohio, which accounts for around 60% of the overall labor force. This actually puts Ohio in the top 1/3 of all states for number of stars in the workforce. When compared to the nation, workers in Ohio are actually less likely to have a bachelor's degree and also less likely to have a high school diploma. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide provides an overview of stars across Ohio, actually broken out by county. So the dark purple is where stars make up a larger portion of the labor force. Generally, what we see as a trend across the country is that large metro areas tend to attract higher educated workers. Excuse me. This is actually consistent in Ohio, where stars represent half of all workers in counties where Columbus and Cincinnati are located, so less than half. Alternatively, in more rural counties, such as Clark and Columbiana counties in Ohio, actually 3 out of every 4 workers are stars, so a much higher portion of the workforce. This slide's actually also about understanding the labor force, not only about understanding the labor force and where stars live, but one thing we also want to think about when we're looking at geography is how racial segregation could also potentially be limiting opportunities for stars within specific areas as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide presents a picture of the national and local Ohio workforce by race, as well as educational attainment and race, which you can see on sort of the right-hand side here. I think the headline for this slide is really that the vast majority of the Ohio workforce, more than 3/4 actually, is white compared to 62% nationally. So this is a pretty big difference. There's also a much smaller percentage of Hispanic workers in Ohio, around 3%. Compared to nationally, which is around 17%. When looking and thinking about educational attainment by race, only 36% of white workers in Ohio have a bachelor's degree, making workers in Ohio much more likely to be stars when compared to the nation as a whole. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide is a little busy, so I'm going to do my best to break it down for you. So the graph on the right-hand side actually shows all of the occupation categories that we have and use to classify workers with the percentage of stars in those jobs for both the nation as a whole and Ohio. The graph is actually sorted in descending order with the highest wage occupations at the top and the lowest at the bottom. To give you a little bit of a sense of wage, the highest wage categories sort of in the top 1/3 of this pay at least or around $21 an hour, with the lowest wage categories paying $15 an hour or less. As you can see, if you can, see these bar graphs here in Ohio and the US nationally, STARS have actually found routes into sort of protective services, which is in the top kind of 1/3 of this middle upper area of the chart. But I think where Ohio really presents a unique opportunity for STARS is in production occupations, particularly iron and steel and motor vehicle manufacturing, where 12% of STARS currently work as compared to 8% nationally, so a big jump there. Essentially, when interpreting this graph, anywhere where the orange bar surpasses the purple bar on the right, that means that there is an overconcentration of STARS in that occupation. As you can see, for both the US and Ohio, STARS are overrepresented in the bottom portion or lower wage occupations of this graph, and that's something we want to change. Next slide, please. Oh, so actually that's a quick overview of the STAR landscape in Ohio. I think we're going to be sharing the slide deck out with all of you in follow-up. I know that was a lot of data in a short period of time for Ohio specifically. And for those of you that might be interested, we do have more robust data broken out by the state of Ohio, as well as some of the larger metro areas, including Cincinnati and Columbus. So feel free to reach out and we're happy to share that more detailed information as well. But I'm going to kick it back to Bridgette, who's going to dive a bit deeper into how we as an organization are trying to really impact that data and create opportunities for STARS. So Bridgette, back to you.
Thanks, Jen. And so when we think about our work, we think about our work in what we call our air game, which is pretty much most of the stuff we just covered, which is rooting things in our data, rooting things in our insights. And then that air game really informs what we call our ground game. And so we talk a lot about the data, STARS, where they're located, occupations, but how do we get employers into this space to really connect with STARS? And so one of the things we've done is we've built out a platform called StellarWorks, which is a way to aggregate supply and demand in a single one-stop location. And so how StellarWorks works is we partner with talent developers, or you may call them training providers. And that can be anyone from a community college to a workforce organization, a for-profit boot camp, nonprofit boot camp. It can be a military service program. And we partner with those talent developers to be able so that they can build their profiles on the platform, upload the curriculum that they teach, and then they invite their STARS to build and publish profiles on the platform. And then we have an algorithm that parses out skills. So it's a skills matching, skills verification platform. We use SkyHive to parse those skills. We then invite employers to also build out their profiles on the platform as well. And then this matching happens between the roles that are there that employers have listed and the skills that STARS have said that they have. That skills validation happens, and then that's how the job matching takes place. Having come from the talent developer world, having been with Year Up and Perscolas, knowing that it takes a lot of conversations with employers to get 1 to 2 to 3 stars in those jobs. And so our goal here is to really be an aggregator of supply and demand in a central location where employers feel like they don't have to talk to every single workforce organization when they're thinking about skills-based hiring, but they can still have access to them on this platform. The other way that STARS get to our platform is we're opening up this fall, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but we're opening up organic sign up where there are STARS, regardless of where they live, will be able to have access to the platform, but also employers, regardless of where they're located, will also be able to have organic sign up to the platform. And so I would love to show this little quick video. I don't know, Carter, if you can click on that YouTube video to be able to just give you a quick overview of StellarWorks.
Yep, just 1 second so the ad goes by.
And if you can't, we are sending this out, so you would have an opportunity. Oh, there we go.
Still through alternative routes instead of through a 4-year college degree. We call them STARS. STARS span all regions, genders, and generations. Black and Latinx workers, veterans, and rural workers. STARS develop valuable skills with other training, yet they're often locked out of higher wage jobs. Even businesses committed to diversifying the talent pipeline struggle to find STARS. How can your business discover its next star? Introducing Opportunity at Work's online talent marketplace, StellaWorks. Now, it's fast and easy to find, vet, and hire diverse talent with in-demand skills to fill higher wage career pathway jobs. In one platform, StellaWorks connects stars and employers while uniquely integrating training providers. Every candidate comes through a trusted provider who has verified the skills of each star. Integration with the Workday Skills Cloud provides stars and employers with a common language to describe a constantly evolving set of skills. Finally, the StellaWorks algorithm analyzes your job posting to calculate a skills-based match score for each candidate. The higher a candidate score, the more likely you found your next star. With StellaWorks, employers hire people for their potential, not pedigree. Find talented stars faster and easier than ever. If you're among the growing number of companies committed to hiring stars, request a StellaWorks demo at stellaworks.org/demo.
Thank you, Carter. Thanks, Carter. And so again, when we start to think about StellaWorks and thinking about how we get this information to employers, it is really, really important for us to make sure we're grounding that in a one-stop shop. You can go to the next slide, Carter, please. So with employers, it is this place of where they can meet the talent, is where stars can meet the employers. We've really designed StellaWorks to be not a job board. It is a place where stars have the agency to really choose how they want to engage with an employer. They have choice over what their jobs could look like. When you think in terms of stars coming through our training organizations, oftentimes we're trying to help them navigate into the careers and just get a job under their belt to get that experience to then be able to move into higher wage work. But in this instance, this gives them the chance to take ownership of how they do their job search and how they connect with employers. We also have a customer success team that onboards and helps to make sure that everyone is situated on the platform in the right way. And then we do a lot of follow-up and a lot of coaching. So it's not your traditional job board. It is one that is really engaging. And then the last thing is StellaWorks was designed with stars in mind, because stars on StellaWorks do not compete with four-year degree holders as they would if they went to an Indeed or LinkedIn. And so you can actually skip the next slide and go to slide 21. Yeah. And so one of the things when we talk about agency and we talk about equity and dignity, we really want to make sure that stars understand the value that they bring to the table. And so we did some work this year around a customer journey mapping to really understand the prototype that we created here, which is Adriana. Adriana is not a real person, but Adriana is who we have in mind when we're thinking about how we're helping stars navigate their careers. We know that Adriana can hit a ceiling because she doesn't have a four-year degree, and there's only so far that her job may allow her to go because she doesn't have that. And so some of the things we really want to make sure for all stars that we're doing is when they start to hit that ceiling and they know that they have a higher level skilled work, how do we help them navigate that? Again, that's where StellaWorks comes in. That's where partnerships come in. We do a lot of business development and conversations with employers, advisory with employers. And so again, at the root of what we do, it is stars like Adriana that we want to make sure we're supporting. And so if you go to the next slide, that leads us to this, again, we started this conversation out about momentum. And one of the things that we've realized is skills-based hiring has taken off. And so this fall, we're launching a ad council campaign in partnership with the Ad Council in Ogilvy, which is called the paper ceiling. We know that there are so many stars now that have hit the paper ceiling. And this is the invisible barrier that comes for workers that don't have a four-year degree. We know that workers who have not gone to college don't have alumni networks. The social capital may not be if you've gone to college, you've built social capital, you may not have built that. We oftentimes are the social capital for stars. And so we want to make sure that people understand stars are hitting a paper ceiling and they have the skills to do much more work. Let's see them, let's understand them, let's look at their skills and let's move them into additional higher wage opportunities. And the Ad Council, if you'll go to the next slide, is, and this is not a sale for the Ad Council, so I want to be really clear, it's to really show you the momentum that we're feeling. And so the partners that have come in to champion this work, those partners that are allies, and then all the supporters so far, and we're continuing to add to this list. But this campaign will kick off in the fall, and that's how we are building on the momentum around skills-based hiring and moving more of the country's workforce into well-paying, equitable careers. For StellarWorks, one last thing to add is no employer can post a position on StellarWorks if it's under $20 an hour. It has to be at a minimum $20 per hour, and it has to have a defined career pathway in order for them to become an employer on StellarWorks. And I think that is it. I think we did that in about 20 minutes, 24 minutes to give you some time to ask questions. So thank you for bearing with us. And
thank you. I just love the paper ceiling analogy, and I'm looking forward to that campaign rolling out. So I'm hoping that we get some more questions from our participants, but I will kick us off, and I would love to hear you say a bit more about how you interface, or how the platform, how Opportunity at Work interfaces with all of the other systems out there. So there's a lot of different platforms. There's a lot of different, there's the public workforce system, there's TANF, there's SNAP, there's just so much out there. How do you connect, and how does your work intersect with others in the field?
Great question. So there's a couple ways our platform intersects. So one of the things we've been recently going through, and this is from an employer lens, is we've been going through a integration with Workday, because we want to make sure we're integrating into employers' ATS systems, but we're also building API integrations where you can just plug into someone's system so that we don't create more challenge for stars when they're trying to apply for jobs, and we're not creating a challenge for employers where they have to go into multiple systems. And so this integration is really, really important to us, and we're wrapping up the Workday integration now. When you think in terms of state systems, so we actually were the organization that worked with the state of Maryland to remove degree requirements from thousands of state jobs. How that conversation actually happened was through they wanted us to think about their workforce exchange, and how would we be able to plug into their workforce exchange. It proved to be a little bit more tedious because there's already an organization that's providing that. And so they decided instead to just be an employer on StellarWorks, and to open up state jobs for stars in the state of Maryland. So we're now talking to 5 additional states that are wanting to do the exact same thing. So our goal is to plug in with API, ATS integrations, and to make the process a lot easier. But a lot of those are just conversations to figure out where we need to plug and play to be able to support partners.
Absolutely. That's exciting. I'm wondering what, so working with the state automatically takes me to the role that policy and advocacy efforts play in helping to improve opportunities for stars. Can you share any particular public policy or practice changes that, as we're in Ohio, we could be thinking about relative to increasing uptake, I guess?
Yeah, well, so one of the things I'll say is in President Biden's State of the Union address, when you heard him talk about skills-based hiring, that came from us. It took a lot to get him to put that one line in his State of the Union address, but that was Opportunity at Work's work through our policy team. It's because we with the work we've done with states, what we've seen is states have a robust opportunity to open up so many jobs for the residents that live in those states. But then you start to think about, how do you drill that down, not to just state, but how do you drill it down to county, to state government? And the biggest player is federal government. Federal government has so many jobs that are well-paying career jobs that people can move into, but they have so many restrictions on how people can get into that. I live in the DC region, and so everything either requires a security clearance, or you can't access a job because of all the stipulations that federal government has placed on that. And so some of the policy changes we're working on is to change those with federal government, opening up more opportunities, opening up apprenticeship opportunities within the federal government as well. That's the other thing we've been working on is apprenticeships from a public policy space. And then one other thing we're working on is really with SHRM to get them to adopt STARS as a talent category and start to build out STARS in the work that they do so that people understand when we're talking about skills-based hiring, there's a talent category identification, and this is who we're talking about.
Thank you. So one of our other partners, the coalition's partners, the National Skills Coalition, and we have a question here about how your work aligns with their city's work. I'm not familiar with their city's work. So Christina, if you want to enter more detail into the chat, that would be great, unless Bridgette, you're...
Oh, it's NSC, National Skills Coalition? Oh, great. So we partner with National Skills Coalition. I actually did a presentation with Andy recently, as we were both talking with Walmart about how Walmart is actually really trying to open up more equitable hiring in higher wage roles and the work that they're doing in their companies where they're moving people from their retail stores into higher wage roles. And so National Skills Coalition, we sign on to a lot of their work that they're doing on the Hill, particularly around Pell Grants that they're working on. And so our work aligns, our policy team works very closely with theirs.
Gotcha. So along those lines, you talked about Pell and that, you know, obviously Ohio with the Jobs Act has an advocate in Senator Portman, but we have some questions about credentials and training around exactly that. How do you see credentials helping to move STARS forward? And how do prior learning assessments and credit for prior learning fit into that strategy?
Yeah, great question. So I'll take the latter part first. So we know just through our own data insights and research that the bulk of STARS are build their skills higher through employment. So we shouldn't ever think about STARS as some anomaly, right? We also have built the bulk of our skills through our employment as well when you change one job to another. And so we do believe that there should be credit for prior learning, credit for work experience. If you've moved from a frontline staff member to a manager, that's a bulk of skills that you've built that should be some credit for that someone should be able to gain, especially if you're not able to go to college or not able to go to get a 4-year degree. So we definitely believe that. We also do believe too that credentials do help to move STARS forward. So that's why we partner with a lot of organizations that offer micro credentials or boot camps. We partner with community colleges because we feel strongly that there are credentials that people will need. But in the end, there should be credit for prior learning. There should be credit for work experience that people already have, especially if their career path has taken them from frontline to manager to a higher level role. And I think you changed that to National Fund for Workforce.
It looks like, I think that Christina, instead of National Skills Coalition, is talking about the National Fund, and Cincinnati just recently rejoined the National Fund Network. So we're thrilled to have them, and that makes more sense to me. I was a little confused. Thank you for clarifying, Christina. So you mentioned apprenticeship, and as we think about, there was just an announcement today about apprenticeship awards, and one is coming to the Cleveland area through ETA. How could STARS, or how does your work inform apprenticeship from are you developing competency-based apprenticeship programs or supporting that work? What does it mean to apply a STARS approach, or to get STARS assigned or aligned with apprenticeships?
Yeah, so Opportunity at Work is not a direct service organization. So we don't design programmatic models, but what we do is we do help to inform those with the talent developers that are standing those up. So we do inform those. We do have these conversations with them about what we're hearing from employers and how that should be added in. So some of the things we've done with apprenticeships, we have an innovation team. That innovation team has worked with organizations like KPOR out in the Kapor tour out in the West Coast to really understand apprenticeships and to help them to think through the research behind apprenticeships and how more organizations could actually stand those up. We are working with a couple of organizations in Ohio right now, actually in Cincinnati, one in particular, that's brought together a group of CIOs to think about tech apprenticeships and how they can bring those into their company to start to build the talent pipelines that they're trying to build. I also think too, for a lot of the tech roles that have the highest degree requirements, I think that's where the apprenticeship fits in the best. So you think about software developers. Software, you don't need a degree to be a software developer. You do need project-based learning and project-based work to do that. But I absolutely think roles like that where you see the degree is where we should be transitioning those to an apprenticeship so that employers can feel the confidence that they need to feel when they're hiring, but that stars also feel like they're gaining the additional skill building on the job while earning money.
Thank you. That's helpful. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So it has me wondering, you're doing all sorts of great work, and I hope you do much more work in Ohio. But there's got to be folks who are like, I'm not really a fan. I don't want to do this. Or, there's a reason we go to college or get these papers. Can you talk a little bit about where you face challenges or what the barriers are?
Yeah. So, everything has to have a proof point. That's just how we're wired, and the other thing I think I've realized over my many years is that we don't like to change the way we do certain things. We just don't. So, our K through 12, you may have some great K through 12 school systems that are doing really innovative work. But overall, our education hasn't really changed. It hasn't aligned with the workforce in the way that it needs to. And so when you only understand or follow a certain path, obviously, you're thinking the next step is just college. But again, even from a K through 12 perspective, you're not considering the fact that the bulk of the folks that are graduating are not going to college. So there's got to be something there for them. On the work side, it's the same thing. It's like, we don't have time to look through all of these resumes. And now you're telling me I need to consider someone that hasn't earned a degree. And the degree is what I'm using to say that they can do the job. So right. Where we get the naysaying is that. It's like, how are you going to validate these skills for me? How will I know that this person can actually do this job? And the conversations I have with employers are very straightforward, which is, well, how are you validating the skills of a degree holder? And that's a moment where they're just like, well, they have a degree. It's okay. We're talking to people who have skills, they have work skills. So validation. So that's where we get the biggest pushback, is this place around the degree, the skills validation, and how do you do that? The other place is people, this put it out here. It's just, it's implicit bias. It may be unconscious for some people, but the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about someone without a degree is, who is that person and where did they come from? That's really loaded language. That's a loaded question. And so that's the other thing that pops up for people, which is why whenever we present, we really try to show that stars are the full diversity of the U.S. workforce. It's not just about BIPOC people. It's not just about military. It's not just about women. It's about the full diversity of who we are as a country.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point, that we ask, who are they? Where'd they come from? But we all know someone who has an advanced degree and you can't figure out how they even get dressed in the morning. So, right?
I know.
It happens. We don't question it that way. So, yeah.
No, we don't. And the other thing too is when we talk about barriers or challenges, some things that come up in the conversation sometimes is too, well, what additional support will people need? And it's like, well, what support does your staff need now? It's right. Like, you can't start to see people as different because the way they gain their education and their skills potentially looks different from the person that you're hiring with a degree. And we all have stars in our families. All of us do, right? And so that is the thing that I would say the most barriers and challenges. Hi, Tony. Sorry.
I was just going to say, our friend Tony is on the webinar.
Oh, I love Tony.
That's funny. So I could keep talking, right? But I have the luxury of being able to talk to you on other occasions. I would love to give you an opportunity to ask us questions. If there's questions in the group that haven't made it into the chat, just sort of want to open up the floor. And I'm sure Tony would have something to say, right?
Yes, I do have questions. So I would love to just understand the folks that are here on the call, because we're in webinar format, so I can't see you, but would love to just understand, what do you see as pain points in the work that you're doing? You're doing fantastic work, and I'm quite sure some of the data we shared is not new to you. And so would really love to know, one, what support could we provide in the work that you're doing to help to move more stars to equitable hiring pathways? What are your pain points with employers? That's what I'd really love to know.
I'll kick us off and say, just from my experience, having piloted a skills-based hiring project in Northeast Ohio, we got pushed back exactly like what you said around the validation. Well, how do I really know? And that's a big issue, as well as having healthcare is one of the sectors that's really, really needing people right now, and still is governed by legislation and regulations and licensing and all that. That gets kind of tricky, but conceptually, I think most of the employers that we talk to were like, well, yeah, of course. If you can tell me that someone has the skills and competencies they need to do the job, then yes, I'll hire them. It's sort of the devil's in the detail with the operationalizing of that, but would love to hear from my colleagues. And if you can raise your hand and we can unmute you or let you talk, you could enter it in the chat. Tony, what do you think?
I think, hello, everybody. Great to be here. I'm glad I was able to make at least part of this. I think the biggest challenge that I saw was the processes that we have in the HR departments. Mm-hmm. So again, we talked about, you run into these leaders and they're like, oh yeah, if you can show me someone that has the skills and is willing to learn and willing to grow, absolutely, I want them on my team. And then the screening process that's used through the HR department doesn't align with that. Mm-hmm. And so we have to go through all these extra gymnastics and hoops to get to the person that's going to push back on HR, and if you don't have those kinds of relationships, think of how many good hires they lose out on because I didn't have someone to send the resume directly to that was senior enough in the organization to go and say, I want this person included in the pool of candidates. Yeah. So I think we still have a long way to go with our HR departments.
That is a great point. One of the things so we're working right now on a project in Houston, and the project in Houston is with the energy sector, and they have signaled that they want to transition a lot of their jobs over to skills-based hiring. And we're not just talking about O&M jobs, operations and maintenance, or drilling jobs. We're talking about professional jobs that they have. One of the things that was really clear to me early on was that, this is coming from C-suite and executive level. Recruiters don't know anything about this, and neither do hiring managers. And so when you ask about barriers, so to Tony's point, yes, we have to make sure the conversations I'm having with them is, this is great. I love the energy around the executive team. Mm-hmm. Now, let's bring the hiring managers to the table. Let's bring the recruiters, because that's where stars get lost in the shuffle. And to Tony's point, they lose out on amazing talent like that. It's also about the sense of belonging. When you think in terms of DEI and DEIB, so B is for belonging. You can be inclusive all day in your hiring, but if a star doesn't feel like they belong there because they didn't get the right onboarding because everyone wasn't aligned on skills-based hiring. I've learned that hiring managers don't care about degrees oftentimes. They just want the talent in the doors.
Yep.
And so they need to be at the table and part of the conversation.
Absolutely. I see Jeff Smith has raised his hand. Jeff, go ahead.
Hi.
Oh,
Hi
another
there.
friend.
How are you?
Yes, another friend. I've been
Jeff, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I co-chair the CIO roundtable in Greater Cincinnati. So I'm part of the group that Bridgette referred to in terms of expanding their work geographically into Ohio, and very much look forward to continuing that effort. And so I guess one is I wanted to thank Bridgette for the shout out. Two is I wanted to just offer my vocal support here. And then specifically to your question about barriers or whatever, I would reiterate a point Bridgette made a little while ago about proof points. And we've had modest success with the apprenticeship model. And well, with skills-based hiring, we've been doing it in IT roles for 5, 6, 7, 8 years with reasonable success, but not at a large scale. And so you've got a Pareto thing where 20% of the employers are hiring 80% of the stars. And so I think we just need to really take it to the next level. And where that plays out is getting companies to more visibly see, hey, company X, who we respect, is already doing this, and they're doing it pretty well. So maybe we should look at it. And company Y, that's only dabbling in it, but they see that company Z is really doing it anyway. So we just got to put peer pressure on the leaders of our employers to lean into this rather than continuing to dabble and experiment.
100%. Jeff, thank you. You're right. And I think to Jeff's point too, we have to hold employers accountable when they say, well, there's a talent shortage, we can't find people. There is no talent shortage. It's how your company is sourcing talent. On the flip side, though, we do need to also make sure employers are at the table, because oftentimes we're trying to build so many things and employers are absent from the conversation. And so they need to feel like they're engaged and they're included as well.
Absolutely. And, I would add to that part of the challenge, or as far as barriers, is in some ways how traditional workforce systems and programs have been set up, because we default to training and credentials and just a really specific set of indicators that someone's ready to work. And it's not always easy to, quote unquote, track what skills folks have and how they're moving with them. So it looks like there's a question in the chat. Are there suggested ways of introducing skills-based hiring to new sectors and for-profit employers? And I bet Bridgette could do a whole separate webinar on this. Okay, I see it right there. Yep.
Yeah, we're actually standing up what we call advisory services. It's under our insights team, and they will be bringing employers to the table in groups to actually help them build skills-based hiring models within their companies.
And Melissa, I would just to put a plug for the coalition. This is something that has come up in the coalition's policy priorities. And, we really see it as an indicator of a business willing to invest in their workers and do new things to attract talent. So would love to talk more with you about it from a coalition perspective as well. So it is 1:59. So maybe one more quick question, or I'll ask Bridgette and Jen to share parting thoughts. Okay, I think it's parting thoughts.
Awesome. So parting thoughts, first of all, thank you so much for just being present today. We really appreciate it. Thanks for those questions. I know people have them and are thinking about them. So feel free to share those with Rebecca and she'll get them over to us. It's great to see familiar faces. So Tony and Jeff, thank you for being here, but we really appreciate you leaning in, and we would love to be able to support the work in Ohio, across the state. As I mentioned before, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland are three markets that we're really interested in, as well as just working across the entire state. So we're here. Just reach out, let us know how we can be supported. And I am going to plug the paper ceiling, because the paper ceiling is this campaign that's coming that will open up the aperture for more stars and more jobs. We feel confident about that. And that's not just unique to us, that's across the US. So just want to say that again.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is. We'll be looking for the paper sealing work and certainly promoting this concept across Ohio. If you're interested in learning more, Carter just put the email in the chat. You can email me your questions and maybe we can do a deeper dive on some of these very specific topics so that we can see the opportunity at work team across the rest of the state. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you sharing with us. And again, as a reminder, the recording will be available on our website within the next couple of days. And I look forward to continuing to talk to you, Bridgette, and talking more to you, Jen. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.